communicating with people all of the time, wherever you are, even though it's mostly working silently, you still are speaking. But the photographs that one creates when you're working observationally appear as if there's been no direct communication, and unless you have somebody looking directly towards the camera, it's purely observational. But when one makes a portrait, there's no question that there's been a sort of direct connection and communication.
Melting Pot, a global podcast series hosted by Pyle, connects guests who have inspiring stories and reaches out to a multicultural audience over 52 countries. Guests are diverse, such as celebrities, entrepreneurs, travelers, and many more who've had a turning point in their lives and moved over to a holistic lifestyle. Follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, social media. Hi everyone. Today I am in conversation with a very accomplished artist, photographer. Her name is Vanessa Winship. Vanessa is a renowned award-winning photographer. She's known for her portrait, landscape, and documentary photography. And her works are generally in black and white. And the projects that she's been involved in have been in the Balkans, in the US, in Turkey, the Black Sea. So she's had an amazing repertoire, which of course we're going to talk about with Vanessa. But I have to add here that she's also won Photographer of the Year at the Sony World Photography Awards in 2008. And she was the first woman to win the Henri Cartier Bresson in 2011. She's also an Honorary Fellowship of the Royal Photographic Society, and her work is held in permanent collections. But she is also, I'm not sure if I can't say if you're an author, but I know that you've published multiple books. So thank you so much, Vanessa, for joining me today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really happy.
Okay, so let's kickstart the conversation with you sharing a little bit about your personal journey and how you found your passion for exploring cultural heritage through photography.
I think that I have my grandmother to thank, really, for the beginning of my curiosity about photography. When I was a little girl, my mum would take me to her mother's house and they would want to be chatting and talking about whatever was happening. And in order to keep me amused, my grandma would put me in front of she had a writing bureau with some family pictures in, and there was one particular photograph that really took my imagination. And it was a photograph of a wedding, and my grandma was one of the bridesmaids. And so this was a young girl, a teenager. And I think for me, I was fascinated knowing that it was my grandmother. And so looking at my grandma, who's an old lady, and then looking at her as a younger woman. And I suppose when I'm thinking about it now, she was almost certainly much younger than I am now. So I'm thinking about my own granddaughter and how she would be looking at me. So I think it was that sort of shift in knowing that time changes and also the landscape around us. But that's the starting point, really. And then after that, much later, I went briefly to art college in Hull. I'm actually from Lincolnshire, and Hull is the biggest city across the river. And so I hadn't really thought about photography from that point, really. It was something that was in my unconscious, and I liked photographs. And then at the college, I think I was a little bit out of my depth. But I should also add that at school, I had two very wonderful art teachers, one Mr. Poole and the other one Mr. Houghton. I think I was named after Mr. Poole's daughter, and the other one Mr. Houghton. And both of them taught me different things. And Mr. Poole taught me about faces, interestingly, and Mr. Houghton spoke to me about walls and trying to get me to appreciate the detail of walls. And so those aspects were things that that you hold somewhere in the back of your subconscious mind. Anyway, when I did finally go to art college, I was out of my depth, but there was a photography module, and I rekindled my interest in photography. And then later on, with my then partner, we moved to Bristol. I had my son by then, and I enrolled on a course at Technical College. And all of these feel like so long ago. And it was from there in Bristol that I think, properly developed my, knowing that this was what I was going to.
How do you navigate the ethical considerations when you're actually photographing different cultures? Because you've moved around, as you're also saying that you go and base yourself. So how you have to be mindful through your photography. So how do you actually, what are the different kind of considerations that you do take when you are amongst people who belong to different cultural backgrounds, so that you're able to get the essence of it without actually being insensitive, if I may use that word? Yeah, so how do you actually navigate that?
It's a really interesting question, and it's complicated, of course, because I will never be from another place other than the place that I'm from. I think there is something interesting about being an outsider, in that, in a certain way, I was reading something by Frantz Fanon recently about what it means to be an outsider if one stays. You're in a certain way treated with suspicion, but at the same time, it gives you in a certain way, it affords you, or it affords the people that you're photographing a certain freedom. If that makes any sense at all, it's with somebody that you know very well. There's too much baggage, but in a certain way with a stranger, it's that is somehow disappears. Of course, it's not as simple as that, and I think that it's really a question of, I think, if I have a skill, it's one of being quite quiet. I'm not, and people may tell you differently, but I feel that I'm somebody who's very quiet. And whether that's a question of I'm somehow able to just be ignored in places that I go to, and it's not a question of hiding. I'm never surreptitious. I always place myself wherever I'm working, and I know that people know that I'm there.
Yeah.
And once you're there for an extended period of time, people start to ignore you. That's not answering your question about the ethic, what it is that I do. I don't know really. I think that for me, it feels like it's a question that I want to respect and honor whoever it is, or whatever, or wherever.
So your works spans different genres. You do documentaries, portraits, landscapes. How is your approach similar for each genre, or do you have a different approach when you're doing photography, documentaries, or portrait or landscape? So what is your process like for each one of them? Is it similar? Is it different? Are there any commonalities?
I guess the commonality is me.
Yeah, of course.
But I think that the greatest difference, if it's a difference, well, it certainly is a difference, is that when one makes a portrait, it's absolutely a direct contact. Of course, with the documentary style work, you are communicating with people all of the time, wherever you are, even though it's mostly working silently. You still are speaking, but the photographs that one creates when you're working observationally appear as if there's been no direct communication, and unless you have somebody looking directly towards the camera, it's purely observational. But when one makes a portrait, there's no question that there's been a sort of direct connection and communication. And of course, when you're working in a place where you don't speak the language, it's absolutely necessary that you work with somebody who's either who is a local person. Right. And so when I made portraits in places where I don't speak the language, because obviously I worked in many places and I would have been an absolute genius if I spoke all of those languages.
Yeah.
and I'm far from that. So once I began to make formal portraits in places that I didn't speak the language or didn't have enough language to communicate well, it's absolutely necessary to work with somebody who is a local person or who does speak the language. Of course, when you're photographing small people, you're not asking complicated questions, and in actual fact, you're not asking questions when you're photographing small people. That would be, and this is where, for me, ethics comes in. It would be, I believe it would be unethical for me to question children.
Yeah. So
when I photograph children, I'm not quizzing them. I'm not asking them any details at all about their personal lives. It's very simple. It's very straightforward in a way. What is your name? And the most simple things that we directly share. They would often tell me that they liked my hair or they liked my clothes, and those kind of simple things, really. So it remains distant and intimate at the same time. I think that's really the main difference when you're making a portrait in a place you don't speak the language absolutely necessary to be with somebody who does. And then, of course, when you're in a place where you do speak this, you have a common language, then you can speak for however long that person is willing to afford you their time.
Yeah.
Because, of course, they're giving you their time. And it's absolutely vital that you honor them and make a good portrait of them. So,
yeah, no, that makes sense. So I wanted to ask you, photography is evolving with all these technological advancements that we are seeing. So how do you adapt, and how do you incorporate these new tools and techniques while you're still maintaining the timeless quality that you have in your work?
I think it's really important to be absolutely aware. I'm old, but I have absolutely no wish to be a dinosaur. And so I think that photography has always been about technology. It's always been about, and it's relatively young as a medium. But I think probably partly younger people who have been brought up with modern technology. So in a way, I'm from that generation where there were no mobile phones and there was no internet, and we had libraries for our
research.
For our research. But the younger generation are brought up with computers, and they're brought up with technology. So in a way, it's to the young that we have to stay connected. I think to follow it, to be ready to understand what it is, and what are the positives and what are the negatives to any kind of modern technology. And I think just to stay abreast with what's going on, not to shut yourself away from it. I'm by nature a little bit of a hermit, so, and I'm actually quite shy and quite a little bit socially awkward, but I'm still really wanting to keep abreast of what's happening. It's not, I was going to say, it's not the technology that I'm engaged with. Of course, I've shifted away from analog to digital photography. If I have a work that requires me to work quickly,
right,
it's absolutely necessary for me to work digitally, and I've embraced that. I'm not so good with it, but I'm still engaging with it. And at the same time, I remain interested in early processes. That's beginning to be something that I'm looking at, how photography began. I think maybe the thing that's most exciting for me is books, printed matter. That's becoming, or has become, there's a real renaissance with the book form, and that I really appreciate and want to. That's something that I'd like to. I've always had an interest in books, and photography books are becoming really a huge thing, and books are accessible.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So much, Vanessa, for your insights and the thoughtful way in which you have tried to convey. And it's really, you are you let your photography speak. And I think that is so important. And that's so wonderful about your work. And I'm sure you have so many more projects ahead of you. And I look forward to being able to, with your publications, to be able to get a hold of them. I know you have permanent, you don't call them exhibitions, do you?
There are two different strands. I'm talking.
Sorry, it's permanent collections, right?
So my work is held in a number of collections, but there are also festivals that show work, and that's one avenue that's really important for the work to travel. So you saw the work with the pre-Pictet as a traveling exhibition. So those festivals are really important platforms for people to show their work. So that's a means of work being circulated. Also, World Press is another platform. So each of different platforms, and then of course gallery exhibitions. So there are festivals where work is shown and circulated to a large public, and then smaller platforms, if you like, where you're showing work within a gallery setting. So there are many different ways of having work shown, and some of it is broad, which is really, for me, really interesting and exciting. And books, moving exhibitions, as you saw with the pre-Pictet, that's a great way particularly for young people as well, to put their work into a festival. And there are lots of festivals currently running to be able to show their work. It's important. I think the Royal Photographic Society has it has its own platform where they invite young photographers to, or actually not just young photographers, anyone actually, to put their showcase their work. And lots of different people. Book fairs are really enormous now and really important for people. And if we're considering space, books are relatively small and contained, but there are many, and all of it feels exciting.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think this is a good insight for young photographers who are just starting out, to know that they should not be disheartened, and there are different ways in which they can get their works to be seen, as you mentioned.
Absolutely, there are open calls.
And open calls and things like that. No, so that's very encouraging. Thank you once again, Vanessa. For more weekly conversations, do listen to Melting Pot on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts. Follow us on YouTube and on Instagram at Podcast Melting Pot. So until the next episode, this is Payal signing off.